Hey, how you doing, everybody? My name's Walter Powell, co-founder of Politisscope. So excited to have everybody here. For one, let's first start off by saying Happy Black History Month to everybody out there and just all the beautiful people of African descent that are doing great things in this month and just in the year. So just to give a backdrop of what Politisscope is a nonpartisan player profile app for politicians that breaks down and explains every bill a politician votes for against in the layman's terms. So really just trying to make it that one-stop shop for all politics. I'm excited about this conversation this evening, and let's get it going. Tiara, over to you.
Thanks, Walt. I'm Tiara Chesmer, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. In the evening, to tell you a little about myself, in the evening, I had strategic partnerships for Politisscope, and my day job is diversity and inclusion at a wealth management firm. I'm super excited about today's conversation and cannot wait to dive into this hot topic around the Black Republican experience. So without further ado, let's introduce our guests. Eugene Craig is the CEO of X Factor Media and managing partner of X Factor Strategies. He's former vice chair of the Maryland Republican Party, and in 2014, Republican nominee for Baltimore County Clerk. Eugene attended Penn State University as well as Bowie State University, and he's a member of the Policy Advisory Council for Bipartisan Justice Center. He's appeared on such platforms such as CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, The Washington Post, The New York Times, CNBC, and is a regular contributor to the Roland Martin Unfiltered with Roland Martin. Eugene, welcome to the panel.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Our next guest is director Phil Lee Williams. Phil's known for his edgy, controversial content on Instagram, for being an unapologetic, Trump-supporting conservative. Being a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, he has no problem with confrontation and having his back pressed up against the wall, which contributes to why he stands so firmly with his political and social beliefs. Phil, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thanks. Our next guest is Roxy Ndebumadu. Roxy is best known for making history in 2019 and being elected as the youngest woman to serve as Bowie State Councilwoman and the first African-American woman to represent District 4 within the state of Maryland. Roxy also holds a key role at Microsoft as Federal Customer Success Lead. Roxy, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Our next guest is Joe Collins. Joe served with the United States Navy for 13 years. Growing up in South Central Los Angeles has braced him for his new role as the next U.S. representative for California's 43rd Congressional District. Joe's compelling decision to run for office and serve as congressional representative in defending those without a voice who live, work, and do business in California's 43rd District was easy. He earnestly and unwaveringly advocates for fair treatment, equality, and respect for all citizens. Joe, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome Jackson White to the stage. Jackson is not only the co-founder of Politisscope, but he's also editor-in-chief, and besides myself, is the only non-Republican on this panel today.
What's going on, everybody? Little old me.
So to our audience, I apologize for the technical delay. Obviously, we're living in this virtual world. Things happen, but I would love to get right into this conversation. So let's first address the elephant in the room, right? So we're all African-American descent here, and usually that doesn't go hand in hand with being a Republican. So tell me a little bit about your experience as a Black Republican and in any turmoil or adversities that you've had to face in your work. Anyone who wants to take that question, just jump right in.
Well, I guess I'll jump in first, probably the OG here. I'll say for the large part, it's been a great experience. I've been able for the last roughly 12 years to serve as that bridge between the Black community and the Republican Party, whether that's been providing the opportunity to, have folk like J.C. Watson and Michael Steele come in and, help further issues like school choice, or, bringing a bipartisan effort to the table, particularly Black bipartisan efforts to the table on the topic of criminal justice reform, and not just at the federal level, but working up and down the multiple levels of government to, essentially affect change on an issue that, directly targets our community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in there?
I think that
go ahead.
Being a Black Republican has been a very, like strange experience. You have the good and you have the bad. One of the biggest issues is like going to the Black community where people are not, they're not really privy to seeing Black conservatives or Black Republicans. So when they see you, they're like, oh wow, why are you a Republican? Are you a sellout? Are you a bootlegger? Like what's going on? But overall, they understand at the end of the day that we all have the same issues, and I don't think a struggle is primarily represented by one particular party, especially if your entire state is doing very bad.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Roxy. Go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, I would classify my experience as very interesting because uniquely, I'm in the state of Maryland, which is a heavily Democratic state, and especially in Prince George's County, where it's another very, very heavily Democratic county. And so here I am in the third largest city in the state of Maryland, and I am the only Republican that sits on our city council, and we operate a $60 million budget. So I have these 6 other colleagues who happen to be Democrats, and I'm the only one. So because I'm in a community which is 56% African American, oftentimes I get those looks as, Roxy, why the hell are you a Republican? This doesn't even make sense. Then to take that a step further from my colleagues who are Democrats, it's almost like, how did you even win? Like what inspired people to think that they would be okay voting for somebody who was a Republican? But like Joe said, I think what brings us together is we're all after the same things, but in very, very, very different ways. And I think what happens is my constituency, they can recognize that at the end of the day, what matters is that they have a fearless advocate that's going to fight for the things that they care about, that matters to them. It doesn't really matter what party you're a part of. And maybe sometimes a different perspective is very much so needed in order to continue to move us forward.
And Roxy, you bring up an interesting point because you talked about, everyone's just looking for that fearless leader who's going to fight for them. But on the flip side of things, there are so many African Americans that are reluctant to join the Republican Party. So, can you tell me about, some of the key factors that are aligned with the Republican Party that appeals to you the most?
I think for me, what aligns the most is really, honestly, being a part of the Republican Party and seeing the Republican Party really embody the values of freedom and really advocating for people to reach that success that we all dream for. Everybody's here to take care of their families. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to make it out of a place that they have come from. So I think for me, those are the values that I see the most, particularly around education and particularly around the way that we manage money and particularly around the whole limited government infrastructure. I think sometimes when people become so heavily dependent on government, it limits their ability to their own success because then they start to look for the government for everything. But in my community, what's so beautiful and what's so interesting, because we are the wealthiest African-American community in the entire United States, you have people who are very, very passionate about their children's education, very passionate about the quality of life, very passionate about their taxes, and passionate about this thing that we look at that we call success. And they want that for their children. They want that for their families. They want that for themselves. And so I think for me, that's what I resonate with the most. And that's what I see my community resonates with the most. And what's interesting is when I do talk to them and when they call me, because I'm very accessible, like I give everyone my cell phone number. It's actually public on my Facebook page and on my website. Like that comes directly to my cell phone. So when people call me and they have this discussion of, Roxy, oh my gosh, why are you a Republican? Or I didn't even know you were a Republican. Then we start to get into some of those issues that are more aligned with the Republican Party. And they start to say, well, wow, I never looked at it like that. No one's ever talked to me about that. I never thought that. So maybe I might be I might have misperceived things a little bit. And maybe I might have thought about this wrong this entire time. So it's very enlightening.
Is it a fair statement to say that, I don't want to categorize one community of people, but a lot of African Americans may be ignorant to some of the policies, Republican policies that are for the betterment of minorities?
I think so.
That's fair to say.
I think so personally, and I think anybody else can chime in, but I personally think so.
I'll chime in here for a second. I think that this, right, more times than not, what happens at the national level with national figures, typically brands the party across the board. Whereas what happens at the state and local level probably is dramatically different, has definitely has a much more heavier impact on people's lives. I can use a couple examples, right? Let's take Maryland here. We have the Republican governor, Larry Hogan. We know the national political scene, if we were to go by the national political scene, you would probably think that, Hogan came in and slashed all types of crazy budgets, that, didn't care about black folk, just was really negligent. Where in reality, under, the current Republican governor we have in Maryland, we have the most money spent on education ever. We've had, multiple criminal justice reform passed. We're on the path to seeing legalized cannabis in the state of Maryland. We're seeing, heavy investments in blighted areas, and particularly in Baltimore City and the worst parts of Baltimore City. That's what's happening under a Republican governor. And if you were just the national political dialogue is what defined everything, which often it does, right? And that's just because of the voices involved and a lack of other voices involved. That's just what it comes down to. But what you'll see on cable news or national news is often dramatically different than what happens on the ground level or at the state level, where lives actually matter, where actual issues have to be dealt with, and it's not just philosophical or debate.
And I actually wanted to touch on that because, as Tiara pointed out, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat either. I'm an independent, more left-leaning economic views. And I think that one thing in America that's lost is there's not focus on policy and a lot more focus on rhetoric, as we've been talking about. So oftentimes when you'll hear Republicans say things about freedom of choice, when you're talking about things like healthcare, but then you get lost in the weeds about special interest of who's giving who money from the pharmaceutical industry or the hospital industry. And the same thing happens on the Democratic end too. So I'm not saying that one party is more corrupt than another, but oftentimes I think that, and what I wanted to ask you guys about is, what types of policies specifically do you think the Republican Party platform offers, especially on a state and local level, that really, really can help us achieve those things like independency, financial education, not relying so much on government resources, versus the rhetoric that you hear. And then oftentimes, you just get big tax cuts for people who don't need them. You get regulations cut that keep people's drinking water safe because so-and-so doesn't feel like paying to keep it clean. So what are the distinctions in policy versus rhetoric? And I also wanted to say too, as I've been working more in politics, one thing that I've come to find is I've, come across professional Republicans like yourselves. And then you get to the policy, but outside of that, the voters so often just don't really know what's happening outside of, I want my freedom and I love America.
Yeah.
So, I'll say this. I think the biggest thing that you're going to come that you'll get from a good Republican administration is pro-growth economic policy, right? I like to use the city of Atlanta as an example. When I look at Atlanta and I look at the Atlanta metro area, I see a beautiful combination of two things. I see the amazing work of Maynard Jackson and going to war with folk that, the white folk that held contracts that, essentially we have to build wealth on, and, getting black folk involved there. But what I also see is that, essentially a forever of good, what would be considered, sorry, Joe, to run off to Houston. And you're seeing it across, you're seeing it in a lot of different places. But I think the biggest thing that you probably get is is good economic policy. And from my personal perspective and philosophy, I think, black people everything starts with economic, right? You know, I think Ho said the best, economic freedom's our only hope. And I think when we take that very, very seriously, the game changes dramatically.
Okay, I think that one
Joe,
thing that we always forget is when it comes to policy making, one thing that Democrats do that Republicans don't do is Democrats create too much policy. We can look at the Affordable Care Act, which people consider the Obamacare. Now, what happens is when you create too much policy, you restrict markets. And then when you force people to use the market, i.e. big government and a reliance like the councilwoman said earlier, it drives the prices up. And so a lot of people get upset. Well, you're giving tax breaks to the rich. Well, they forget that you work at these companies. And in order to lower the cost of living, you have to give certain companies tax breaks, because once you give tax breaks, it lowers the cost of manufacturing. It lowers the cost to retain people. It lowers the cost to buy certain things that you need for a company, which in return, it also lowers the cost of living, but it boosts the amount of wages that you get, or it makes balance between your wages and your cost of living. So where you have Democrats that want to regulate every single thing, whether it's free speech, guns, or whether it's what type of business that you can't have or how much you make in a business, too much regulation is always bad. And that's one thing that flows with me about the Republican Party. Less regulations and more freedom, so we can be able to create the type of wealth, generational economic wealth that we need in order to be a sustainable country.
What about like how, for instance, like wages, productivity in the United States has gone up, you know, over the last 40 years. Wages, not so much. Executive stock options have gone up and up and up. You know, benefits, wages, not so much. So as the shift has been taken out of labor and put more and more into capital, you know, from the way I see it, I don't think like the education system and things along those lines have kept up with how the economy has changed. So for instance, as the economy becomes more financialized, 80% of all stocks are owned by the upper class. So how do we go about bringing people along to how the economy now works versus changing it? Because I don't particularly like when I look out and I see the rising cost of living and people at the top of the economy getting richer and richer and richer and richer, I don't really see how what we've been doing is really the best step forward. Or I don't really think that, and because America's so huge and there's so many different kinds of economies all over the country, I don't feel that there's really a single approach that can be taken. So like more regulations, is that necessarily bad just because? Can't there be good regulation to keep people safe? Is it, you know what I'm saying? So like when I look out, I don't particularly see that as taxes have been cut for business up all these corporations, that wages have gone up. I don't
and to really simplify what Jackson is saying is, how are you bridging those gaps? Like, how is the Republican Party bridging those gaps, right?
See, I think that when we talk about wages versus economy, I think one thing that we have to look at, what type of wages are you talking about? Are you talking about people who work at fast food industry, people who are customer service? Are we talking about people who are in the tech or automotive industry? Are we talking about people who are in the transportation industry? And lawyers, attorneys, like all of these things plays a huge role, because I know people who are making, you know, dirt money, but you work at, you know, like Walmart or some type of fast food restaurant. And I know people who are attorneys who are just making a killing, but I also know people who are in the financial industry that are doing very well. So when we talk about, you know, wages versus corporate interests, I think that one thing that we have to understand is too much regulation will always be bad, because once you close that market, inflation is going to increase. And so the value of the dollar will always decrease under inflation when you have too much regulation. So the only way to lower the cost of living is to cut the regulation. We'll use California as an example. They're gentrifying entire cities in California because of too much regulation, the cost of building, the cost of materials, the cost for developers to come in and even survey a land before they even start to build. And so they'll spend millions of dollars building, but because of regulations, the restrictions, the taxes, they take that cost and hand it down to us who are consumers. And so we have to think about that. You know, let's cut regulations and let's have a free market, or we can increase regulations and close the market, which drives prices and inflation up.
Absolutely. Joe, thank you. Phil, I want to get to you because you've been pretty quiet during this conversation. You're pretty vocal on social media about your views around being conservative, a Trump supporter. Can you tell me a little bit about, you know, your thought process and why you are conservative and what Republican policies kind of align with your thought process?
Yeah, so for me, mostly I look more towards the more social part of it when I'm conservative Republican. I don't look too much fully into our as strongly as the others here into the political part. I look into the people like me, the people that we never voted, people that never voted until this go around 2020. I was a fan of Trump from the minute he ran 2016, and I was on his side, and I thought he made a lot of sense. But my dealings with it and what I've been going through, not even going through, but what I've dealt with is on it, being a Black Republican, Black conservative. It's been pretty simple. It hasn't been that bad. I've always been vocal with where I worked at, wherever I was at, whether it's when I was in hospitality in the hotels, or whether it's when I'm on set in Hollywood. I talk to everybody and let them know, yeah, I like Trump, yeah, this and this and that. People always ask why, and in the sense of why do you like Trump? And with Trump, the reason I like Trump was because it's very simple. A lot of times we come from left, right, all this. I'm gonna make it very simple. He made sense. Things that he said made sense. I'm a big fan of sense making, and when you make sense, for me, you 90% of the battle is won if you make sense. If the dots all connect, I don't care if other people don't understand. They need to work on their understanding. I understand well. I comprehend well. So when you talk sense and you make sense, when he told Black people, hey, what do you have to lose? And everybody got up in arms. I seen it as that's a factual statement. That's just as fact. That's a factual statement opposed to like a statement like Joe Biden, you ain't Black if yada, yada, yada. So that's not sensible. But what Trump says is sensible. So that's my Trump thing. But in the Central Republican Party, they just stand more with things that I agree with, and it's not so much of preaching. The Democratic Party feels like I'm at church. At least the Black part of the Democrat Party feels like I'm at church, and someone's preaching at me, and their preaching is always to make me feel emotional so that I can make an emotional decision based on the things that they said to get my emotions up.
Okay. Valid response. I actually have the question for Eugene, Joe, and Roxy. Given that Phil has just expressed that he, is a supporter of Trump, did Trump's presidency, make you feel any differently about the Republican Party, or at least his presidency as a Republican?
Well, I would say this. What's going on within the party post-Trump is not new. The party went through this probably at a much broader scale in 2010 during the Tea Party wave, where 30, 35 incumbent members were popped off in primaries. For me personally, I've seen the full range of the party. I've seen the best of the party, and I've seen the worst of the party, and I've been in the firing squad of both ends of it. But the thing is this, right? If the Republican Party wants to be a viable party going forward, if the Republican Party wants to be a party that's able to shape this country, shape policy, have a voice, have impact, the Republican Party is going to have to move itself into the 21st century with the 21st century electorate that is blackening and browning on a daily basis. And to be quite frank about it, it's not Trumpism. It's not nihilism. It's not, nativism. We live in a multicultural society. We live in a multiracial society. And, if the Republican Party wants to have a future, it needs to look to the models of a Chris Christie circa 2011. It needs to look at the models of a Charlie Baker circa 2014, 2018, or a Larry Hogan circa 2014, 2018. Where, hey, around actual solutions, you're able to pull people together. Where around actual solutions, you're able to, better people's lives. Folk, especially Black people. And look, we're talking to a Black audience, or Black people talking to a Black audience. Black people are not going to take the Republican Party seriously until Black America knows how seriously the Republican Party is about them. And that does not start or end with Donald Trump.
Yes.
Anyone else want to chime in there?
Yeah, I don't think that a Donald Trump presidency changed the way I feel about the Republican Party. I mean, growing up in a Democratic house, we always seen the Republican Party as rich white man, old rich white man, and that still holds true today. And he still fits that same mantra. The only difference with him is he was bold. He said what he wanted to say, did whatever he wanted to do, and he really didn't care what anybody said about it. Going forward, the Republican Party is going to have to embrace the Black community. We're going to have to see color. And that's one thing that a lot of conservatives and Republicans do not see for whatever reason that they have. But this is something that have been put into the faces of Black people ever since we were children. And it absolutely matters to us. And moving forward, in order to get the Black community and the Latino community to be able to vote Republican, they're going to have to be open to the ideologies as well as to the issues that we face in the Black community. And so, that's what I look forward to doing. I know Eugene and Phil are doing the same exact thing when we get on social media, create our different organizations to give the Black experience to white conservatives or white Republicans who identify as Republicans but want to continue to win.
Roxy, go ahead.
What I will say about this is that I think that I won't necessarily say that Donald Trump changed my ideas about being a Republican, because I'm still currently a Republican today. And if anybody wanted to choose the easier path in my situation, they probably would just go switch and become a Democrat. But I'm still here today. So I'll leave that one there. What I do think in terms of the Republican Party, what's going to happen, where I think the Republican Party tends to spend a lot of time focusing on federal races. And honestly, playing it safe and focusing on federal races in places that you already know that you have the majority, I just think is a waste of time. Mm-hmm. I think shifting that focus and focusing on state and local races is something that we're going to have to take a deeper kind of look into, to focus on outreaching to those communities, like Joe just mentioned. Eugene said this, Phil said this as well, reaching out to these African-American communities as well as these Hispanic communities, because they are on the local level. And how else do you do that? By getting local politicians like myself, like a Governor Larry Hogan, to be able to go into those communities, because they are the closest to the ground. So I think that current strategy of just focusing on federal races and turning certain places red or etc., I don't think that that's a viable solution going on. I think if we're going to have, if the Republican Party wants to be very serious, we're going to have to shift that approach and then start infiltrating kind of state and local to get closer to the people, because the larger narrative doesn't fit every single person. That larger federal narrative that you see doesn't apply to me as a city council person, because those are not the same issues that I'm dealing with. The issues that I'm dealing with are closer to somebody's daily life and the things that are going to affect the quality of their life day to day. So those issues are going to be drastically different. But if that brand is going to stay that brand and it's going to differ from a lot of us on the local level, there's going to continue to be that gap and that disconnect to our constituents that we're close to. And what happens is when you have fewer of me, like fewer African-American women who are elected in Democratic areas that are Republican, it makes it a lot difficult for us to push that message, because it is very different from a national message, because the issues are not the same.
And if I can, just to piggyback off of Roxy, right? It's disclosure, me and Roxy know each other personally in real life. I was around when Roxy got elected. Under any other circumstance, outside of Roxy being an amazing candidate with good policy and things that she wanted to do in the city of Bowie, she wouldn't have been elected under the weight of the Democrat machine that runs that entire county. But when Republicans put the community first and articulate that, and then put real action behind it, we win and get elected. The same way, Roxy's very reminiscent of Michael Steele, Bob Ehrlich, circa 02. When we put actual solutions on the table and respect the community and engage the community, we get elected. And that's a prime example of it.
And let me just add on to that. Something. Sorry, Phil, I just add one more point. Eugene really drove that home, because please keep in mind, I registered 45 days before an election and ran against 4 other people. And our community is reminiscent of up to 70,000 people. So registering in 45 days, being a Republican in a place that's 99.6% Democrat, running against 4 other people who are all Democrats over the age of 50. That's something that's very serious. To be able to win by 16 votes, that's a big deal. So like Eugene says, when we can put our action behind some of these local candidates on the state and local level and really get in there and put the community first, you have products of people like me.
Yeah, and I want to say, as far as in Trump, and just briefly, just Trump. So Trump made me want to be a Republican, right? He made me feel like I want to search for truths. I want to search for facts. I want to search for details. He made me want to be a Republican, opposed to when we had Obama. He made me just want to have a nice personality. Obama just gave me, okay, nice personality, cool. But he didn't make me want to look into anything. There's nothing he did that made me go, let me think about, but, and that's cute and all, but I like that Trump made me feel like, let me be a part of a particular party. He had this strength. It didn't look like he would buckle, and I'm not a buckling guy. So it made me say, you know what? No matter how wild he says things, it made me say, at least let me look into this Republican Party, because no one else has made me want to look into the Republican Party. I wasn't even into politics until Trump came. That says a lot, that one person, and he's not God, but it says a lot about someone that one person can make so many people start to focus and pay attention to politics that even Obama didn't get people to do.
So thank you, Phil. Eugene, you touched on this a bit, talking about how the media portrays Republicans in the wrong light. I mean, I think they do that with a lot of different areas. But the question is, what do you think the Republican Party struggles with? Why do you think they struggle so much in attracting minorities? So beyond the media part, what do you think it is?
Well, the thing is this, right? The Republican Party has a extremely white base, and that's regardless of where you're at, right? That can be in extremely diverse Maryland, New York, New Jersey, or it can be, in Alabama, Montana, Nebraska, right? So when that's the baseline, it's a driver for everything else. So, all the anxieties that you see with, white people, and I don't classify as anxieties be exclusive to poor whites, because you see as many, MAGA doctors, lawyers, CEOs involved in a lot of tomfoolery that you were seeing, that you would probably expect some of the poor whites to be involved in, right? Mm-hmm. And so when that's our basis of our construct, you see everything else that flows from the Republican Party. So, you see the pushback on things like voting rights. You see, and look, these are some of the most egregious things that come out of the Republican Party. What's happening in Georgia right now, and the limit access to for Black folk to vote, is egregious. I mean, and it's not limited to Georgia. It's happened in 20 other states. And I would be shocked if it happened in another 5, before the end of the year, depending on what happened in their GAs. The Republican Party has a very homogenous base. And with that base, you either fight to expand it or diversify it, or you die by it. Because this country is getting blacker and browner. And that's to say that the issues of poor white folk aren't the same issues of poor Black folk. At the end of the day, both folk are poor. Right. So what it becomes is, okay, how do you properly deal with that? But it becomes easier to not really deal with the issue if I can look and say, hey, this quote unquote person coming over the border, or that's illegal, that really can't get benefits, we're going to say they're taking your benefits. Or, this, Black person that lives in an urban, environment, and you live in the rural environment. And because your life is supposed to be defined as harder than their lives because they have a bunch of government help, X, Y, and Z, although more white people are on public assistance than Black people could ever imagine. And, Black women are most educated, most degreed in this country. the arguments just fall in their face when the actual facts are presented. And the issue with the Republican Party is that they're living in a Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck fantasy world that's been developed over the last decade, 2 decades, and very separated from the actual realities of what America looks like.
Anyone else want to chime in there? Because we are going to wrap up and go to an audience Q&A, but I do have one more controversial question before we wrap up.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Eugene.
Yep.
One of the biggest issues with the Republican Party is the respect, the lack of respect. They don't respect the reality of people who live in different places. And then they put these talking faces in front of white conservatives and Republicans, and they talk about a Black experience that they've never lived. And then they lose the fact that everybody's experience and perspective is absolutely different. And that's one thing that they're going to have to come to grips with as you get more minorities entering into the Republican Party.
I wanted to say, too, just to highlight on something that Eugene and Roxy pointed out on the last question, that I think will be useful for the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party, as well as the entire political apparatus of the country, is the focus has got to be on policy. What are we going to do for you? How are we going to do it? How are we going to deliver? Because bottom line, everybody wants their kids to have good education. Everybody wants good food. Everybody wants to know that their drinking water is safe. And so, like you said, Roxy, that's how you won. And that's how a lot of people come out of nowhere and win. So I think that that'll be a good remedy for the whole apparatus, is to get off the rhetoric and get more on the policy. And what are we going to do? So,
Jackson, let me just say one thing, because I think what I've seen in my experience is there are a lot of Democrats who are focused on policy in my area. However, it's policy that doesn't mean anything. It's policy that's not impacting anyone. It's just for show. And that's what we have to get in our minds. We need to enact policy that's changing people, that's changing their lives, that's giving them opportunity to things. And so and that's been really the disdain of my experience since I have been elected, because that's all I see. Someone will put up an environmental policy that literally does nothing and says nothing, and that's just ceremonial to be able to say, okay, I passed this policy. We did something, hurrah, we passed it. When really, what did that do for the community? You just wasted 2 hours of city staff's time, which is money that's coming from our budget that our taxpayers are paying for, just to do something that's ceremonial. So I think part of what needs to be coupled with that is action in addition to that policy, action that's actually meaningful for the people that we're representing.
I agree 100%.
I agree.
That's one of my biggest beefs with the Democratic Party, is just showmanship. So, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to ask you guys one last question from my end, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. Republicans are rebuilding after this, this post-Trump era. As of recent, 7 Republican members of Senate voted to convict Trump. Does this help or hurt the party? And what are your personal thoughts on it?
I don't think it hurts the party at all. I think the party is broken anyway. You have the establishment Republicans, and then you have the Trump Republicans, and then you have the Republicans who are not even invited to any of the sides. And so I think that the Republicans are right down the middle between the Trump and the establishment. The younger Republicans are going to end up taking over the party. And that's one thing that I'm focused on. I know Eugene and Phil are focused on the same thing. Don't care about the older age establishment played out politicians for Democrats and Republicans. And I think that's going to be the end point of the establishment Republican Party. But I think that with, Trump not doing what needed to be done to, back up the claims that he had with election fraud and all that stuff, that's going to break the Trump Republicans in a little bit as well.
Yeah, I agree with that fully, in the sense of it didn't hurt us. If anything, it helped us. I just think a lot of people got to stop looking at the now. Everybody's too focused on this popcorn, microwave, Instagram, Twitter, get straight to you. No, think about later. Later, these things are going to help us. Like you said, like Joe said, it's made people want to come in and go, oh, okay, well, guess what? Since they're like that, we got to step in now and show them how to hold it down, how to be strong about this. We see what's going on. So, okay, you guys are doing it well. Let us show you how. The young Republicans and the mid, the Black, the Asian, and as Joe know, we've been to rallies and things where the Asian. It's not just the blacks, the Asian, the Latino community. These people are out here, and they're saying, "Yo, we got to do something different. We're not going to stop being a Republican. We're not going to shift and go to that middle ground area where I could go either way all the time, and I never stand on anything. No, we're not afraid to pick one thing. Like there's the Republican people that you were just mentioning, Tierra. None of them will do what Joe did with me in South Central. None of them is going to go to South Central and stand in the middle of the street around a bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters and the other organizations that's in our street at the police station trying to destroy our city and stand there and say, get out of my city, get out of my neighborhood. None of them will do it. But you know who does it?
Shut it down.
I do it and Joe does it.
They won't do it. They're
gonna stay. Huh? What you say?
I said we shut that completely down.
Fully down. And this is where we're from. I'm from South Central LA. Joe's from South Central LA. I'm born and raised, and I believe it takes people like Roxy and Eugene, yes, but I believe now more than ever, it takes people like me and Joe, people that I'm a wow factor. They don't realize when they talk, they go, what? Wait, you what? You support Trump? Wait, you what? Nothing about me, I'm sad to say, looks like it, but it allows me to go into different types of neighborhoods and touch a different type of person a lot more easily than others that don't have but we all have our role to play in it,
Yeah. Anything else to add? Let's go to the questions from the audience. Our first question is from Darrell Roberts. Because culture and downstream from politics, what can we do as a community to change our culture for more positive outcome in our community?
Take responsibility.
Start voting for something new. Just like Roxy said earlier, get involved in local politics. That's the thing that really drives change in our communities. Stop voting for the same thing over and over again. I can't stress this enough. On both sides, we got politicians that has been in office for 40, 50, 30, 20 years. They got to go. I mean, like Joe Biden is absolutely bad for our communities, just as well as Mitch McConnell and any other age politician who didn't even have a cell phone or computer whenever they got in office. They have to go. We got to start getting more younger people in office, stepping up and taking the leadership roles that we're supposed to in this country.
Yeah, I'm all about diversity, so obviously I agree with that as well.
I definitely agree. I think people.
Yeah, and look. I'm a believer. Look, I'm a believer. The biggest thing you can do is just hold your elected officials accountable. I do think that, I'm a believer in term limits. I think the turnover is good. But, also I'm thankful for somebody like a Ron Paul or a Justin Amash that has served, 10, 20 years in the House to just hold everybody else accountable, right? Because you need those people as well. I came up in the Ron Paul era. So I can see both sides of the coin. But the one thing anybody can do is just hold their elected officials accountable. Once the accountability is out the window, that's when the wild stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I think we got to be
quick plug right there, because on the Politisscope app, we have all of the numbers, emails, all that for you to reach your local representatives. So
yeah, I want to say that we in the neighborhoods that I come from, and a lot of.
Oh, Phil, you're unfrozen. Okay, let's see if he comes back, but let's go to the next question until he comes back. From Edgar, what do you think of the Ted Cruz fiasco, and is that a black eye for the Republican Party?
No, definitely a black eye for the GOP.
No, it wasn't. No, it was not. The reason why is because all the Texas that frozen over, the governor of Texas requested assistance a couple of weeks before that storm even happened. And the federal government, the Joe Biden administration, denied that. So when everything freezes over, you can't expect people and their entire families to stay there. There's tons of families that left. And we can't forget that even Chris Christie shut down the state of Florida beaches a couple of years ago due to a quote unquote pandemic, and him and his family ended up on the beach, and really nothing came out of it. I think that what people need to stop doing is stop looking at these public officials as if they're not human. These people are human just as well as anybody else. Him and his family, they were frozen out. Just because they have the money and the means to leave the state doesn't mean it was bad on him. What the Biden administration should have did was they should have took action soon as Texas froze over.
Listen,
I think millions and millions of people don't see it that way. I think that the optics are really bad. What were you saying, Eugene?
I was gonna say this. I disagree with Joe. I love Joe, but I disagree with him here. I think that it was a huge black eye for Ted Cruz and for the Republican Party. The rule 101, right? They say you never take a vacation during campaigning, when the rule is really you never get seen taking a vacation during campaigning. If there was a sub A to that, is that you never, ever, ever escape to the other side of the border to give your family a better life when the people that elected you and that you're serving, are suffering. And the bigger responsibility on Ted Cruz is that when he was Solicitor General of Texas, before he was the United States Senator for the state of Texas, he defended this system that they have put in place in Texas, which allows for them to have an independent electrical grid, separate, independent with no partnerships in any other states. But more importantly, allows for the utility companies to essentially run rampant. He helped put that in place when he was Solicitor General in the state of Texas, for the state of Texas, when Rick Perry was governor. So if there's anybody that holds a large amount of responsibility, it's absolutely him. And for him to run off and try to escape to Cancun, and I don't understand why he didn't just do it by PJ. I mean, his wife is a partner at Goldman Sachs, and before he was an elected official, I mean, he was running up at $700 an hour, lawyer fees. He should be seen in public. I mean, there's so many malfeasant and negligent. I mean, from all angles with this Ted Cruz situation. I mean, the guy probably should actually resign. I mean,
no.
Don't care about them. You absolutely should just go ahead and step aside from the political stage and call it a day. It's not like the seat. If he resigned, the seat will go to a Democrat. There's a Republican governor. They'll appoint another Republican U.S. senator, but probably one that's not as trash as Ted Cruz.
I'll tell you this. He's only doing what Joe Biden's allowed him to do. Joe Biden allowed people from other countries to come over here. Why can't he go over there?
But regular people ain't looking at it like that. Regular people ain't thinking about all that. They just see that this man left. You know what I'm saying?
They see the news.
If I could just chime in really quickly.
Yeah, Roxy, you finish your point, and then I'm going to go to the next question.
Okay. So as somebody who's currently elected, I would be mortified if my community was suffering in the midst of something and I left. I would be mortified. I made a promise and I took an oath to serve my community. That means in the good times and that means in the bad times. So unfortunately, I'm going to agree to disagree here. I don't think that was a good idea. I do think it does have effects in terms of the optics and the way that it looks and the way that people feel. People's lives are at stake. I mean, yesterday, I don't even live in Texas, but yesterday, me and some strangers that I met have raised up to $80,000 within 10 hours. This is something that we're doing on a social media app called Clubhouse. We've raised $80,000 for people in Texas, and I don't even live there. So I do believe that was negligent. I do believe that it was not a good idea. And at the end of the day, yes, you do take a responsibility and you have a responsibility to serve those people. I understand that you may be human, but at the end of the day, that still doesn't cut it. Your responsibility is to those people in the good times and in the bad times. And that does not mean that you get to leave in the midst of something as severe as what's going on in Texas currently.
Thank you. We're going to go to the last question from our audience tonight, from Asia, I believe that's how you say her name. What are your thoughts on the social and ethical debate in politics regarding the difference between equality and equity? This is a good diversity question for me, guys.
Yeah.
For years, there was much talk and push for governors providing social equity to our buyout communities. But now that argument has shifted towards government being more responsive to injustices that require equity.
Asia's a good friend of ours. I will say this is a good question, and Asia's one of those good people that you want good staff working with elected officials that can raise these type of issues. So look, for a long time, the idea and discussion was around equality because that was just the way the debate was framed. But as life goes on and as debates are reframed, I think equity is the proper conversation, right? Because the thing is this, you can't necessarily guarantee equality of outcome, but you can provide an equitable access. And I think that, where you have communities that have been afflicted by the wrong of government, right? I mean, this is as big of a small government argument you can make. We have communities that have been afflicted, for generations by the wrong of government, and those afflictions have just literally just transformed from one form to another, just gotten more sophisticated. So instead of Jim Crow, you get John Esquire in 2021. I think that moving to finding equitable solutions is the proper way to go. And look, that may mean that, hey, instead of, trying to give every single school the same dollar amount, you're targeting what school needs what.
I agree. I teach this at my firm, externally as well. Anybody else want to chime in there before I go to our final remarks?
Yeah, well, I'll go ahead and say this. When it comes to equality and equity, I think that we have to think, how do we get here? And the only issue that we have with equality is you still have people making the laws. And one thing that we can't forget about people is human nature. Everybody has their own human nature. Everybody has their own internal prejudice of what they like, what they dislike, and how they're going to act behind the scenes and how they're going to act in front of the people. And I think when it comes to equality, we can never gauge equality based on a person, but we can put remedies in place like Eugene was talking about that can ensure every single community gets equity so they can build their own type of equality.
Absolutely.
And I got a small thing too to add to that. I think no matter how much equity we give, no matter how much we are equal, but the equity part, I look at it like this: if we don't start to push for I'm speaking of the communities that people like me that we live in. If we don't start to push for maintaining and actually taking care of these things that we have, the liquor stores on the corner, the barbershop right here, the plaza over there, if we don't start paying attention, because we focus on that, we got to start focusing on, hey, let's not bring the value of the things that we're given. If it doesn't matter how much we're given, if we don't take care of it, the value comes down, and then guess what happens? Other people come in and take advantage of that, and then we're back again to saying, hey, we don't have a fair share, a fair stake. Back. I heard Creflo say a long time ago. He says, if I'm broke now, and I don't know how to manage money, when I get rich, I'm going to be broke then too, because my same habits are going to happen even when I do have money. That's what we got to start to focus on that too. No matter, it doesn't matter. We got to focus on that too. It works hand in hand.
Financial wellness, for sure.
So one thing that I'll add really quickly, is
real quick.
Yeah, you have African American kids who are not even being exposed to STEM in their schools. But then when you go to these Caucasian neighborhoods and these Caucasian schools, you have them who have all of these STEM opportunities so that when they get to college, they're able to compete at a faster rate, which already puts the African American community and all these minority communities at a great disadvantage. So I think the conversation shifting towards equity is the right direction. Equality is something that you get that you predict later on down the line.
Roxy, I agree with you fully. My firm that I work for as my day job, we focus on STEM, we focus on financial literacy, all of that in underserved communities, which I'm very proud of, and I think it makes a big difference. Okay, so 30 seconds each. Please give me your closing remarks, anything that you want to plug, or what's next or upcoming for you. Eugene, you go first.
All I want to say is thanks for having me. I think these conversations are necessary. Provide the full side of the spectrum. And folks, download Politisscope. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Bill, go ahead.
I just want to say we're going to take Hollywood and we're going to take it away from this cancel culture, democratic mob rule. Hollywood, welcome to the rebellion, Gina Carrero, and we're going to take it.
Thank you, Phil. Roxy.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and just keep an eye out for a lot of the things that we're doing in the city. I think I'm a great example of what it means to shake something up on the municipal level. So please download Politisscope so you can find a way to contact me and get my information.
Amen. Joe, go ahead.
I appreciate you guys having me. It was a great conversation. The Black experience, being a Black Republican is absolutely important. And I think these conversations need to be had. We have to be able to talk about issues from the perspective of inner city conservatives or Black conservatives. And, this is one of the reasons why I started the New Black Republican. But we will continue to fight. We will continue to let our voices be heard, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on.
Joe, thank you. Jay, you want to go?
Yeah, I just thank everybody for being on the panel tonight. This has definitely been an interesting conversation, and keep on building community. And like everyone's been saying tonight, the most important thing, no matter what your stances are, is that you get involved and that you get some skin in the game. Because if you're not, then what you complaining about? You know what I mean? And there's so much to community organization. And the first step is to give a damn, and the second step is to take action. So, let's just move forward and let's have more compassion and empathy, and let's work together.
Well said, Jackson. I want to thank you on behalf of our entire Politisscope team for engaging in this conversation with us. Like all of you said, I believe it is absolutely necessary. To our audience listening, as you heard from our panelists, please go download Politisscope, get engaged in the political process, speak what's on your mind, be heard, and get involved. The app is available on all Google and Android platforms. We are completely nonpartisan, unbiased platform. So we love to share all sides and perspectives of what's going on in our world today. Let's create some change, people. Thank you so much.